Putin had planned this spring as his final major offensive. Simultaneous offensives were to be launched at every critical point along the front, from Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka, and from Humiliating to Orikhiv. To this end, Russia mobilized its most experienced units, the 5th Combined Army, as well as elements of the 29th and 36th Armies. And nearly 200 offensive operations were coordinated along the front each day. The goal was to break through Ukraine's fortress belt and take full control of Donetsk before summer arrived. But the opposite happened. Kyiv closed out April with victories. ISW released details of these victories to the public on May 2nd. According to assessments, Ukrainian forces had managed to recapture a net area of 116 square kilometers from Russian control. This is not an isolated failure, but the latest link in a structural collapse that has been deepening since November 2025. And to understand the magnitude of this collapse, we need to take a closer look at what happened in April. Ukraine did not recapture these 116 square kilometers by chance. Throughout April, operations generally followed the same pattern. First, drones identified Russia's weak control points. Then, assault groups infiltrated these points. Subsequently, robotic systems cleared the positions, and the areas were secured. Russia had captured most of these areas using infiltration tactics. Small groups had entered the gray zones, established positions, but failed to establish true control. Putin believed he would eventually reinforce these weak control points over time. However, Ukraine did not give him that time. In the Kostiantynivka-Drushkivka tactical area, Ukrainian forces repelled Russian infiltrations with periodic counterattacks. Geolocated imagery shows that Ukraine has gained ground in the eastern and southeastern sectors of Kostiantynivka. Yet previously, Russia had claimed these areas were under control. This area is critical. Kostiantynivka serves as the southern gateway to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and if it falls, the entire urban area will come under pressure from the south. Defense analyst Denis Popovich assesses this risk. This area has been fortified since 2014. The enemy could gnaw away at it for years, but the cost-benefit ratio is horrific. Ukrainian forces are systematically applying pressure on the flanks, thwarting attempts to advance from the north, and holding the line around Lyman. In the direction of Zaporizhia, around Humiliating and Orikhiv, Ukrainian counterattacks have halted Russian advances, and some positions have been recaptured. Russia had concentrated significant forces along a narrow 15-kilometer front here, aiming to establish a bridgehead for an assault on Zaporizhia. However, Ukrainian advances have been reported west and south of Humiliating, and Russian infiltrations have been cleared. Around Pokrovsk, gray zones have been cleared through local Ukrainian counterattacks. According to strategic analyst Pavlo Lakiachuk, Russian forces had formed 2 narrow protrusions here, but failed to expand them. Ukrainian forces effectively targeted the flanks, trapping the enemy within these limited corridors. A key common feature of these successes is this: it is not a single major counteroffensive, but the sum of dispersed defense and local counterattacks. The Ukrainian General Staff states in daily reports that they have repelled enemy incursions without naming major operations. But when ISW calculates the total results using its monthly map, the picture becomes clear. A net loss of 116 square kilometers. Oleksandr Kovalenko from the Information Resistance Group summarizes this picture. The spring phase has effectively failed. The first phase, which began in the second half of March, yielded no meaningful results in any sector of the contact line. They are now taking the same amount of territory in a month that they took in a week last summer. So what's behind this stalemate? First and foremost, a breakdown in communication and coordination. In February 2026, the blocking of Starlink terminals in the occupied territories created chaos on the front lines. Drone video feeds were cut off, small units couldn't communicate with each other, and navigation reverted to paper maps. This disruption directly contributed to Ukraine's gain of hundreds of square kilometers of territory in Zaporizhia and Donetsk, and its effects are still ongoing. Restrictions imposed by the Kremlin on Telegram usage further exacerbated the situation. Telegram served as the backbone of horizontal communication between units within the Russian military. Officers shared orders, coordinates, and intelligence information through this channel. The restrictions severed this backbone. The ISW's assessment is clear. Without stable communication, coordinating an offensive has become nearly impossible. Second, seasonal conditions. The winter of 2025 to 2026 was colder and wetter than the previous one. Melting snow and spring rains turned the ground into a Rasputitsa trap. Mechanized units were literally stuck in the mud, effectively reducing Russia's armored assault capability to zero. Third, the personnel crisis. According to journalist Pavlo Kazarin, the recruitment rate for new contract soldiers has dropped by 20% compared to the same period last year. In the first quarter, only 70,000 soldiers were recruited instead of the 90,000 target, despite continuously rising bonuses. Casualties are outpacing recruitment. Russia is losing more than it is gaining, and this gap is growing every month. The Kremlin is avoiding declaring a full mobilization because the trauma caused by the partial mobilization in 2022 is still fresh. Instead, it is increasing bonuses, but the money isn't enough. In some regions, one-time bonuses have reached $30,000 to $50,000, and this bonus inflation is eating into the budget. Fourth, a doctrinal crisis. As armored vehicles and tanks ran out, the Russian army shifted to an infantry-heavy model. Units attacking on motorcycles and ATVs are sitting ducks against Ukraine's FPV drones. These four factors feed into one another. Without communication, there is no coordination. Without coordination, there is no armored maneuver. Without armored maneuver, infantry are left exposed, and infantry losses deepen the personnel crisis. The cost of all these structural issues on the front lines is becoming clear in the numbers. Russia's advance rate was nearly 10 square kilometers per day at the start of 2025, dropping below 3 by 2026. A slowdown of more than threefold. And this slowdown isn't because they're attacking less. Russia increased the frequency of its attacks but failed to achieve results. In the third week of April, Russia lost 7,480 personnel for every 41 square kilometers of territory gained. Every square kilometer gained means the complete loss of 2 to 3 battalions. This ratio is increasing month by month. The loss per unit, which was lower at the start of the year, reached a record high in April. Equipment stocks are also dwindling. Soviet-era depots are running empty, and new production cannot keep up with demand. The quality of vehicles sent to the front is declining every month. The Kremlin is conducting a sophisticated propaganda campaign to conceal this reality. Russia is using infiltration tactics, sending small units into the gray zones between Ukrainian positions. They do not actually control these areas. They are neither establishing a defensive line nor providing logistical links. But propaganda presents these movements as territorial gains. ISW clearly defines this tactic. Russian forces are using infiltration tactics partly to create the perception that advances along the front line are continuing and to support the Kremlin's cognitive warfare efforts. Infiltration zones are shown as a separate layer on ISW maps because the Russians cannot establish actual control there. These areas typically remain as gray zones, trapped between Ukrainian positions, and are regularly recaptured by Ukrainian counterattacks. Kremlin media is trying to spread the perception that we are constantly advancing. Reports of a new village being captured are released every day. But ISW's data tells a different story. Most of the reported areas are contested zones, where the invaders cannot maintain a foothold. Ukraine, on the other hand, is advancing in the opposite direction. By 2026, approximately 600 square kilometers of territory had been recaptured from the Russians, dealing a powerful blow to Putin's Donbass dream. Volodymyr Zelensky stated that for Russia to fully occupy the Donbass, it would need to sacrifice between 300,000 and 1 million soldiers, noting that this would be a huge cost even for Moscow. There are multiple factors behind Ukraine's success, and they reinforce one another. Robotized ground operations are clearing Russian positions using unmanned systems. Interceptor drones are blocking Russian airstrikes at rates as high as 95%. Precision strikes at medium range are systematically destroying logistics lines, ammunition depots, and command centers. This is making it increasingly difficult for Russia to send ammunition and reinforcements to the front lines. The combination of these factors is forcing Russia to defend where it planned to attack, and this paradox is completely disrupting the Kremlin's entire offensive plan. Former intelligence chief Malamud says Ukraine has achieved a robust operational model across all key sectors. These are the most intense and challenging sectors, but they are also the areas where the enemy suffers the heaviest losses. The effects of this stalemate on Russia are multi-layered, with each layer reinforcing the others. Militarily, the spring offensive has failed. Russia's primary objective right now is to launch a full-scale urban battle for Kostiantynivka, but this goal does not appear achievable given current casualty rates. Even if a new offensive is planned for the summer, resource shortages cast a major shadow of doubt. Politically, the loss of 116 square kilometers directly undermines Putin's victory narrative. While the Kremlin attempts to cover up the situation with disinformation tactics, military bloggers and complaint videos leaked from the front lines are spreading the truth. Within the domestic public sphere, the question of whether the war is winnable is being asked with increasing frequency, and a wave of quiet anxiety has begun to spread among the Russian elite. Economically, spending 200 soldiers per square kilometer is not just a human cost. It also entails mounting expenses for training, equipment, bonuses, and logistics. Bonuses for contract soldiers have reached $30,000 to $50,000 in some regions, and this bonus inflation is eroding the budget. And this situation is indirectly affecting Crimea as well. As resources are allocated to Donbass, Crimea's defenses weaken. As resources are shifted to Crimea, the Donbass front remains exposed. Russia cannot resolve this dilemma because it no longer has enough resources to defend both fronts simultaneously. So what will happen in May? ISW analysts do not expect a major operational surprise, but an increase in intensity is anticipated in several critical sectors. Once the ground dries out, Russia may partially regain its mechanized mobility. The end of the Rasputitsa season traditionally marks a period when Russian offensives pick up speed again. But this time, whether it has sufficient resources is a major question. Recruitment is declining, equipment stocks are dwindling, and communication issues remain unresolved. Kovalenko lists the priority axes. First is Humiliating, followed by the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad, Kostiantynivka, Sloviansk-Kramatorsk eastern flank, and Kupiansk. The Humiliating direction stands out as the main offensive focus. Russia aims to encircle Orikhiv here and advance westward from behind the fortified line. The goal is to lay the groundwork for a larger operation targeting Zaporizhia. Kovalenko believes this axis will see the most activity in May. Kostiantynivka, however, represents the most dangerous scenario. Kovalenko warns, an attempt to launch a full-scale urban conflict is one of the most significant scenarios. They will try to enter the city through its industrial and southern districts by repeating the infiltration tactics we saw in Pokrovsk. This tactic is familiar. Small groups infiltrate among civilian structures, establish positions, and then wait for reinforcements. But Ukraine's drone barrier and robotic operations are making these infiltrations increasingly costly. Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad, on the other hand, will likely remain in a stalemate. In other words, no progress is expected on Russia's primary objective. Russia has failed to expand the two narrow salient areas here, and Ukraine's flank pressure is preventing any change in this situation. Popovich assesses the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. They aim to capture it by the end of summer, but given the current pace and casualty rates, reaching this goal seems impossible. The line is holding around Lyman, and the enemy has made no progress there in the past month. In the Kupiansk direction, Russia will continue its efforts to establish positions to validate its claim that it captured the city last year. But Ukraine's robotic operations are yielding the most effective results precisely in this region. And there is an additional risk. Russia is employing a strategy of gradual pressure along the state border in the Sumy, Kharkiv, and potentially Chernihiv regions, a method of nibbling away at small border settlements. Since there are so many such settlements, maintaining a strong garrison everywhere is impractical, and Russian sabotage groups are exploiting these gaps. Zelensky noted that certain activity has been detected along the Belarusian border as well. Small-scale provocations are possible, but they will cost the Belarusian side more. Kovalenko's May forecast reflects this complex picture. They will aim to achieve at least limited operational or tactical results. But what they took in a week last summer, they are now taking in a month. This is not a breakthrough, it is a stagnation on the Russian side. And beyond all these frontline analyses lies a larger strategic question. Is time running out for Putin? This question is not merely a military calculation. It has economic, political, and social dimensions. Russia's war economy appears strong on the surface. The defense budget reached $186 billion in 2025, and oil prices remain high. But underlying indicators paint a different picture. Defense spending has exceeded 7% of GDP, approaching Soviet-era levels. Inflation is high, interest rates are over 20%, and the shortage of skilled labor has reached 4.8 million people. A war economy may be sustainable in the short term, but it is unsustainable in the long term, and that long term is drawing closer with each passing month. The first cracks are also appearing in political consensus. Mil bloggers are now criticizing not only failures on the front lines, but also the inadequacy of air defense, the disproportionate number of military casualties, and the Kremlin's efforts to conceal the truth. Citizens in Tuapse shouting, "Shameful!" Factory workers in the Urals waking up to drone alerts, and complaint videos leaking from the Donetsk front. These are individual small cracks, but collectively they are eroding Putin's security narrative. He operates a system designed to shield his regime from challenges, but at the very least, the choices he faces are becoming even more difficult. And Ukraine's strategy is playing precisely on this timing. The analytical community criticizes this as macabreism. But what Ukraine is doing is not passive waiting, it is actively worsening Russia's situation. Striking refineries, crippling communication infrastructure, increasing the cost of losses on the front lines, and maintaining diplomatic pressure. All of these are aimed at shaping the perception within the Kremlin that the war can be won. That perception hasn't changed yet, but a loss of 116 square kilometers, a fourfold slowdown in progress, and 200 soldiers per square kilometer, these could be the first signs of change. Looking at the bigger picture, April 2026 marks a critical turning point in the course of the war. Russia has suffered its first net territorial loss since 2024. The pace of advance has dropped by a factor of 4. It costs 200 soldiers per square kilometer. Recruitment rates are not keeping up with losses. Communication infrastructure has collapsed. And the first phase of the spring offensive has failed. Kovalenko's macro-level assessment summarizes this picture most strikingly. These results are completely inconsistent with the scale of a large-scale offensive. Advances have largely consisted of capturing isolated forested areas, open terrain, or small, heavily damaged settlements. But the same Kovalenko also warns against excessive optimism. The Ukrainian defense forces have not yet managed to make a breakthrough capable of triggering a chain reaction of collapse in Russian defenses across a broad front. Assessments must remain measured and rational. This balanced assessment is important, because the reality is that Ukraine does not yet have the resources to launch a large-scale counteroffensive, but it doesn't need to. The asymmetric attrition strategy is working, systematically depleting Russian reserves, increasing the cost of every attack, and forcing the enemy to defend where it plans to attack. Kovalenko's forecast is shaping the future. It is more likely that the war will focus on shaping the conditions for a future turning point in 2026. This turning point could occur either toward the end of this year or next year. A decisive turning point has not yet emerged, but the aggressor's stagnation is becoming an obvious and irreversible reality. Putin's victory plan remains on paper, and every piece of data coming from the front tears that paper a little more. So what do you think about this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on TGN's special analyses, please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Let's meet on Spotify to make long journeys shorter and traffic more enjoyable.